So far away, Lucas, as I pick up my coffee, what was the first CD you bought?
I think the first album that I owned was the first album from S Club 7.
You know what? I'm not mad at that. That's I'm like going like that. I'm like going, oh yes, but then again, S Club 7 was a bop back then.
That's the thing. I was a kid, and S Club 7 were fucking cool at the time.
So the Sony PlayStation, hereafter referred to as the PS1 because it sounds cooler, was made with, at the time, bleeding edge technology to such an extent that even today it's considered one of the best CD players money can buy. A feature Sony was so keen to sell consumers on that every PlayStation 1 game sold came with a free CD, even if you didn't realise it. So, first of all, Lucas, are you aware that the Sony PlayStation 1 or the PS1 or the PSX, is that a thing people... I've heard that used sometimes, I don't know why.
I've seen PSX used, but generally just always called it the PS1, yeah.
It's a PS. It'll always be a PS1 in my heart. But yeah, are you aware that the PS1 was a phenomenally good CD player?
Yeah, and obviously it's something that Sony have continued to do over time with their consoles, but more specifically the fact that the quality of the PlayStation CD player is really good.
Yes, so I actually have my childhood PS1 here in front of me. And right here, it still works. You can still plug it in, you can still use it, and it still plays CDs. I checked prior to recording this video just to make sure that it did, so that statement would be incorrect. And are you aware of why it's such a good CD player? And have you any idea why the PS1 is considered to be such a good CD player?
I mean, I don't know the technical aspects of it, but I would presume, it's made by Sony. They would make a lot of stereo and hi-fi equipment and stuff, and therefore just inherently they're an advantage.
Yeah. Oh no! Oh. I was trying to hold my coffee. That was a bad idea. I held a coffee and that at the same time.
Oh no!
Oh no! Let's wipe it up with. Sorry, use some soundproofing to wipe it up. There we go. There.
Oh,
Let's wipe it up with the soundproof. He's not doing out anyway. There we go. Right. Let's try. Oh, we can do that again. Right. So. Oh. It'd be funny if I left that in. Fuck it. Let's go. Right. So far away, Lucas. Are you aware of why the Sony PS1 is such a good CD player?
The SCPH-1001 model comes with an 8km AK4309 AVM 16-bit Sigma Delta DAC chip, which is considered the secret sauce that provides the PS1's particular sound that has audiophiles not only curious, but also using it in their front-end system regularly.
And as an idea of how good this thing is at playing CDs, this little grey rectangle you can probably pick up for about 40, 50 quid from any second-hand shop is a better CD player, according to Audiophile and the tests that they've done on it, than purpose-built several $1,000 CD playing systems made by Sony.
I don't even know how that's possible. He felt this video game player does have outstanding audio performance. He guessed a consumer would have to spend more than $6,000 on a one-box CD player to equal, let alone better it.
It's weird, isn't it, to think that you can go out and buy a brand new several $1,000 hi-fi system made by Sony that doesn't play CDs as well as a PS1. Something you're probably aware of, Lucas, but maybe the folks at home aren't, is that almost every video game console, with probably the notable exception of the PS3, is sold at a loss. And why is that?
Generally speaking, they make a loss on the systems, and I believe Nintendo doesn't as much. But generally the idea is we make money on software, not hardware. Just get the system into people's hands as quickly and cheaply as you can.
It's like the Microsoft model of, we're going to give you the operating system for free or very little money so that you're in our ecosystem. And it's the same thing with game consoles like the PS1. We're going to sell the hardware at a loss so you're in our ecosystem. We'll make the money on the games and the controllers and all that other good stuff. It's like they get a cut on every single one of those sold. And as a result, while the PS1 was sold for a couple $100 on release, the equipment in it was worth several times that, to the point where, as mentioned, it can compete with custom-made CD playing equipment today made by Sony.
Sony is known to overbuild their first few batches of products in a new line and then cut out the good stuff later on.
Because as mentioned, they crammed it full of the most bleeding-edge CD playing technology they had at the time.
See, that's the confusing part to me, is I understand that it would compete with, systems of a similar time period, but the fact that that was bleeding edge CD tech back then, and we still are barely competing with that now, that doesn't make sense to me.
And I know audiophiles will disagree with me, but there's only so much audio fidelity you can get out of a CD. And the PS1 was basically like, scratching up against the limit of what it's possible to achieve. And, because it had all the different cables as well as standard. So that's something a lot of games consoles come with, isn't it? They have all the cables in the back as standard, whereas cheaper CD players and boomboxes never really came with that. Like a PS1, you look at the back of it right here, it doesn't look like you can do much with that, but those little connectors there will allow you to connect it to a fairly robust sound system, which is something that would cost you a premium back in the day with any other CD playing bit of equipment. And it's actually something that Sony have been really, really good with in the past, isn't it? Because Lucas, you probably know the answer to this one, but for the benefit of the audience at home, what is the best-selling DVD player ever made?
I mean, I don't know about DVD players, but I'm sure it's probably the PS2.
It's the Sony PlayStation 2, yes. Lucas, what's the best-selling Blu-ray player?
I mean, probably like a PS4, right?
It's the PS4, yes. And do you know who makes DVD players and Blu-ray players?
I would if I know that would be Sony.
Yes. And you probably remember this as well, back in the day when Blu-rays were first released, a Blu-ray player cost like £1,000, £2,000 for a dedicated Blu-ray player, yeah?
Yeah, the PS3 was by far and away the cheapest option, even if you just wanted a Blu-ray player.
Yeah, and that's something Sony have done for pretty much the entirety of their video game console history. Like, the Sony PS1 was by far the cheapest Sony-branded CD player you could buy on release, and it also played games. When the PlayStation 2 was released, it was by far and away the cheapest DVD player you could get, even ones made by Sony, it should be pointed out, like, were more expensive, but it could also play games. When the PS3 came out, even though the PS3 was infamously sold for like £700, it was still the cheapest Blu-ray player money could buy, even if you went and tried to buy one by Sony, and it also played games. Same issue with the PS4, like early in its life cycle before Blu-ray players became more ubiquitous. And it's like, as I mentioned, it's just, we want to get you in the ecosystem, we'll make our money on the games. We can take a loss on this. When they sell a Blu-ray player on its own, they have to, like, all the cost needs to be absorbed by the initial purchase of the thing, because they don't get a cut on Blu-ray sales.
Yeah, exactly. There's no secondary purchases being made there.
It sounds wild, but when you think of it in terms of economics, it does make sense.
It does, yeah, because they want that 70% cut they get on every fucking Call of Duty sale in the PlayStation store. Of course, it makes perfect sense. They're making way more money that way, but it is just kind of weirdly crazy how many people I know that got their parents to buy a PlayStation 2 or 3 on the proviso of, but it's cheaper than a DVD player and it'll also play my games.
Yep. And if anyone's wondered why that was the case, it's not that the PlayStation 1, 2 and 3 were bad CD, DVD and Blu-ray players respectively. They were actually some of the best on the market and had, as mentioned, some of the best technology available for playing those formats. It's just that they could sell them at a loss because they got a cut on the back end when you bought games for it. And it's just, I thought I'd mention that because a lot of people get weirded out when you say it's a better CD player than actual CD players, but it also plays games. It's like, how does that make any sense from an economic standpoint for Sony? It's because they make money on the games. But to cut a very long story short, the PS1 is a good CD player for the same reason the T800 keeps winning in Terminator movies. It's rugged, well built, and survives through just the sheer force of being that iconic in the 90s.
Old. They're not obsolete. Not yet.
But let's move swiftly on, Lucas, and talk about the fact that every Sony PS1 game sold came with a free CD. So is this something you're aware of at all?
No, this is not something I'm aware of.
Okay, so do you know what PS1 games were printed on?
I mean, CDs, right?
Yeah, I've got one in front of me now. And someone in the audience is going to lose their shit when they see which game we're using as an example. And Lucas, you can't see me right now.
No, I can't.
But you can probably guess what this is. What is the one PlayStation 1 game that everyone always gets weirded out that I own?
Oh, the Wu-Tang Clan game.
The old enemy of Shaolin. They've taken Master Zen. We have to help them.
Move world order. Move world order. Move world order. Move world order.
If you look at the back of a PS1 game case, you'll notice after you read here that the Wu-Tang Taste the Pain is a trademark of Queen Ruby Holdings Incorporated circa 1999. You'll see that this game is printed on a compact disc. And the same is true of every PS1 game in existence. They're basically just printed on CDs. And as a result, every PS1 game functions as a CD. And did you know this, Lucas?
Is this like the thing where like you can play the games as CDs and like it plays the soundtrack or something like that?
Yes. So, if you take your Sony PS1 game, like my copy of Wu-Tang Taste the Pain right here, and you put it into a CD player, you will play the game's soundtrack. But that's not all, because not all games were created equal. Not every game can be Wu-Tang Taste the Pain, which for the curious just plays the soundtrack to the game, which is a medley of Wu-Tang Clan songs, which I think is like pretty baller. I've just now got a Wu-Tang Clan CD and a copy of Wu-Tang Taste the Pain. So depending on what mood I'm in, I can go kick someone's ass as like Master Killer with his fucking backflip combos, or I can just go listen to a few of the songs from the 36 Chambers. Go!
That is pretty cool, especially, if I'd known that as a kid, and I could have been like, oh, well, essentially this acts as an album if I want to put something in the CD player.
And this is the thing, Lucas. Do you ever remember this being touted as a feature?
No, this is some thing that I've heard people talk about, in the last couple of years when people bring up retro facts about consoles and stuff.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that goes viral on Reddit every now and again, where did you know every PS1 game functions as a CD? And that's not entirely correct, because not every single PS1 game does work like that. They all can be put into CD players and will play, but what they play dramatically varies based on how much the people making it gave a shit. So, like I said, Wu-Tang Taste the Pain plays the game's soundtrack, so basically it's a Wu-Tang album for free in addition to being a game. But other games are altogether more different, and you can probably guess, Lucas, what the most popular example of this would be. What game from the PS1 era do you really want to listen to the soundtrack of?
So what kind of stuff is it? Is it's not a soundtrack? Is it just if you put Metal Gear Solid in, it's just codec calls?
Well, because this is a feature that Sony never really touted, a lot of developers didn't really do anything with it, and if they did, it was usually by accident. For example, when it came to games with licensed soundtracks, normally at the end of production, they'd just drop those into a file somewhere, and that's what the game could play. But there's other games that they didn't realise that this was the case, and just any sound effect would be played when you put the CD into a CD player. For example, if you put the Tomb Raider 1 PS1 disc into a CD player, it plays just a selection of all of Lara's voice lines from the game in a row.
Oh, right, okay.
Which means that if you put the Tomb Raider 1 PS1 disc into a CD player, your CD player starts screaming.
Now I'd better take off these wet clothes. No.
Which sounds interesting, but admittedly the same thing happens if you put a Nickelback CD in. And I don't really dislike Nickelback, but I figure that's the joke that's going to make most people go, oh, the internet told me not to like Nickelback, and that joke's funny as a result. But yeah, that's one of the ones where they just clearly at the end of production just drag and dropped all of Lara's voice lines into a folder, not realising that they would all just play when you played as a CD. So apparently, because I've not got the game, but when I was looking it up, it plays the opening narration from Lara and then all of her voice lines in a row without stopping. So it's her opening narration, then all of her efforts of her screaming and shooting guns and stuff. So it sounds like a Yoko Ono album or something like that.
I honestly thought you were just going to be you put the CD in and it's just the words of the butler stuck in the freezer, dear God, help me, I've been trapped by a maniac.
It's they'll just play all the sound effects, because they're sounds that exist in the game, so the CD just plays the sounds of the soundtrack, or even sometimes just sound effects, which happens with some of those arcade game classics. If you put those in, it'll just play all the sound effects in a row from each individual game.
Oh my God, that's terrifying.
Well, speaking of terrifying, if you put the Doom game into a CD player, it will play demonic growling, which is a sound effect that's present in the game throughout most of the levels, but I'd like to think is a deliberate nod to those heavy metal origins of Doom, those stories about old heavy metal CDs, playing demonic messages if they play backwards and stuff.
that's what I was about to say. I was like, oh god, I'm glad, like, some, weird parents didn't catch on to that feature with Doom and start being like, the games are trying to push us towards Satan and all this.
Yeah. It's not a deliberate thing, it's like, obviously, it's just a sound effect that exists in the game. It's the first one queued up in the sound files. Like, it does eventually play the soundtrack if you keep skipping through tracks, but one of the first things it'll do is just, like, play demonic growling. Then you have games like Dead or Alive, which play the announcer tracks for each character, all of their efforts, and then the game's soundtrack, which means it starts with a list of people's names, and then a bunch of men and women going, ugh! Which I imagine is super awkward for all the kids who try that at home.
Yeah, that's the weird thing, isn't it? If you didn't realise what was going on, you just turn on the CD player and someone just starts shouting weird Japanese names at you of Dead Alive characters. Oh god.
Yep. And there's a couple of games where just nothing happens when you put them into a CD player because the sound effects that exist on the disc weren't saved in the right format for a CD player to read. And that kind of sucks.
Yeah, I would have thought that if they've, gone to the effort of doing all this, it would have been some part of, Sony certification process for the games or something, but...
There's just a couple that don't do it, and there's a few, as mentioned, that they just play sound effects, even if the game itself has a soundtrack. There's other ones where they'll play songs that were in the game that got cut out, but got left on the disc.
As you can see, this is a PlayStation Black disc. Cut number 1 contains computer data, so please don't play it. But you probably won't listen to me anyway, will you?
And for anyone curious, there'll be a link to a list below with all of the known effects when you put a PS1 game into a CD player, so you can read through them at your leisure and look for ones that you maybe got at home to listen for yourself. And maybe if I've got the time, I will boot up my PS1 and I'll play some some CD soundtracks through it if I can. I'll try and figure that out because I don't have a CD player in my fucking house. Who's got a CD player in this day and age?
I've got a CD player. It's called my PlayStation 1, Karl.
No, that's fair. Actually, no, now I think about it. Doesn't the Xbox One play CDs?
The 360 does. I know that.
Okay, so...
I used to use that as a CD player from time to time.
So what I might try then is I might try and plug in my Xbox and see if my Xbox can play a PS1 game as a CD. Just to see. So we're going to test this out. Here we are in my very dusty Xbox corner. It's for streaming, don't judge me. You don't see it on camera, so it's fine. We have a copy of Wu-Tang, Taste the Pain right here. It's the black disc. There's me. Hi. Let's put it into the console. Also, yes, I have a officially branded Halo 5 Xbox One that looks like Sergeant Locke. I fucking hate it. Let's put the disc in. There it goes. Here's the Windows Media Player app for the Xbox One. Let's see. Oh, wait a minute. Oh! No fucking way! Wait, play my CD! So, it's time to explain what just happened there. While the Xbox One, via the CD playing app I found for it, did recognise the CD and read it, it would not play it. And no matter how many times I tried to get the Xbox One to play the CD, it would not do so. So further experimentation may be needed here. And the weirder part is that if you watch the clip back, you'll see that while the disc says, I have the case here, it's Wu-Tang Taste the Pain. The actual Xbox One recognised it as Wu-Tang Shaolin Style, which is the name of the game over in American markets. It's just, that's interesting to me. But yeah, I tried. It read the disc, it wouldn't play it. I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe some of the comments can figure it out. And if you do, let me know, because I'd be interested to see a Xbox One place, like a PS1 game as a CD. That'd be very amusing to me.
Okay, so have you got any PS1 game that you're going to try specifically? Have you got a favourite?
I've not got a game that I'm going to try specifically, but I do have an example of a game that took this concept to not even its logical extreme, but just an extreme that I couldn't even comprehend. And that is the game Ridge Racer. And I think you know this one, Lucas, because we talked about it on the podcast a year or so ago.
If it was a year ago, that means I remember zero parts of that conversation.
Well, Ridge Racer for the PS1 does work like the other games mentioned. If you put Ridge Racer into a CD player, you'll play the soundtrack. And Ridge Racer's got a kick-ass soundtrack. But let's say you're a madman who doesn't like the Ridge Racer soundtrack. What you can do is, after you've loaded up a level in Ridge Racer, you can open up your PlayStation. And this is where some people are going to be like, no. You can open it up, you can take the disc out, because at that point the game's already loaded, and you can put in any CD you want, including another PlayStation 1 game, and listen to the soundtrack from that as your background as you do time trials.
Yeah, and if anyone's wondering, it's because, like, once the level is loaded, there's no reason to read the disc anymore.
Nope, and it will actually read any discs that you put in at that point. And that is a feature the game never tells you. It's just something the developers put in as an Easter egg for anyone who wanted to try it. Which means that you can theoretically listen to the soundtrack to anything you want while playing Ridge Racer. Like you can put, like I said, you can put in the disc for another PS1 game. Like you can listen to a Tony Hawk soundtrack while blasting around in Ridge Racer. And that is fucking awesome.